Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits, and this is going to be one of our study group videos on the Sales Cloud Consultant exam. So if you're interested in that certification, hopefully these videos in this series will help you get that certification. This particular week, we had a little bit of confusion and lack of myself communicating effectively, I think, to the team. So we only have one presentation for this week, and it's going to be on facilitating engagements with your customers. And it's a part of the implementation strategy section of the exam. Brenda knocked this out of the park. She did a fantastic job. So take a look.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? You have the main template slide?
Looks good.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I had kind of an overview, it seems, of implementation strategy. So it was facilitating and then just kind of going through all of the phases when you are working with a customer. So we'll just kind of start with that. The next one. So just because it said given a scenario, I figured I probably should identify what scenario we were working with. So right now we have a customer in telecom. They are new to Salesforce. They don't have a CRM and they don't have business processes clearly outlined. So that's kind of what we're working with on the assumption there. And so I took each one of the phases from the study guide and just made them a phase in our overview today. So we'll just start with that. So the customer-centric discovery strategies was part of the trailhead. And one thing I did notice on the trailhead is they didn't line up exactly with each of these phases. And so I kind of had to do some interpretation. So I hope it's correct the way that I did that. But the information is all there. It all came from the trailhead. So it should be at least accurate on that part. But to start off, we've got plan, gathering requirements, and design all kind of fall under this customer-centric discovery strategy. And so here's kind of the highlight, what it means. You basically want to gain insight. You want to share the insight, connect with your customer, and then walk them through the process of deciding what they need from Salesforce. And then the overall goal appeared a couple times. So I'm guessing it's something that's going to be on the exam. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Basically, you're just trying to find out what really matters to your customer, their business, their employees, and then your customers' customers, if that makes sense. So continuing down that path with the customer-centric discovery strategies, the first step in that is to know your customer. So basically, you want to know their industry, their business, and their people. And then once you know that, you want to do this research before you've met with your customer, if possible, so that when you do meet with them, you sound intelligent and professional and all of that. The other thing that you want to do in your research before you meet with your customer is to put yourself in your customer's shoes. You want to be able to empathize with what they're going through. You want to take a walk in their shoes, so you can study like their business processes, if they have call centers, things like that. And then get in tune with your customer's consumer. So visit their website, sign up for their notifications, things like that. So you can be your customer and your customer's customer. The next phase of customer-centric discovery was connecting with them. So right before you meet with them, just kind of review everything that you found and make a list of possible solutions. And you'll notice possible is italicized because those will change as you work with your customer, but it just kind of gives you some forethought into what might be a solution for them. And then just connect with them. That goes back to just empathizing with them. And then asking the right questions to connect on the details. And they had the levels broken out, and those are referenced later on. So that might be something to notate too. They were mentioned a few times throughout the trailhead. And then connect it all at the whiteboard. So they use the whiteboard as the term, but it really can be anything, like an actual whiteboard, sticky notes. I've heard it called several different things, but basically just documenting what you guys are coming up with during those conversations. So that's connecting. And then the fourth kind of step to that customer-centric discovery strategy is creating with your customer. So you want to create the case for change, reviewing challenges, helping them prioritize, things like that. Recreate your customer's story. So it just kind of all ties in together. And then those 3 levels were brought back into this section as well, the level 1, the level 2, and the level 3 on the asking questions for details. And then you want to create a scene with a storyboard and then just co-create a plan. So just identifying what the plan is going to be going forward and then documenting that. So we'll go over that as well. I'm going kind of fast because I don't know how much time we really are going to have. But does anybody have questions so far on the customer centric? We're good?
Yeah, I think you're doing fine. And I think go ahead and take advantage of some of the time since we're going to kind of ad lib some of the other presentations. So
okay,
you've got a lot of good material here. So I think we might as well leverage that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So an example of the storyboard, I literally just took the screenshot from the module, but it basically just walks you through different ways that you can create those stories with your customers. So it's not always just a one line of communication. If you want to have some fun with it, if you need people to, not everybody is always really creative up front. It takes a little bit of time for them to get to warm up to you or get to know you. So these are just different ways that you can approach creating a storyboard. I thought it was kind of helpful to know that. And then after you're finished with the planning, the gathering requirements and design, you're kind of into that building phase. And so what I was able to find through the trailhead that was related to building phase started with the statement of work. And the statement of work module on the trailhead seemed to be very language specific. And so it would be something I would really pay attention to when you're studying for the exam is it talks about it can be different and vary the way that it's set up, but it does need to cover all of the next topics that we're going to cover. So it'll include all of those. So that's probably one of those questions on the exam that they could kind of trick you with or change things up on you. But basically, the statement of work is, just a moment. Sorry about that. Okay, a statement of work is basically the legal document between you and your customer. It outlines expectations very clearly so that you can reference back to it if there's an issue or a problem or something pops up down the road. The clearer your SOW, the better. And then it basically just helps identify, ambiguity issues or expertise like in the beginning so that you don't have to backtrack down the road. So that's a statement of work, otherwise known as an SOW. Oops. And then it talks about like an overview of it. And again, I just took this from the trailhead. There's different phases. There's the discovery, there's the rough order of magnitude, there's the proposal, and then there's the actual SOW. So it just kind of goes through that in some more detail. The part that I thought was really interesting, though, is this, because it outlines them specifically. It talks about the background and then scope. And if anybody's ever had to work on a business process with different teams, scope is very helpful. So to identify that ahead of time before work is done or in the middle of it, having that up front is very helpful. You can talk about your approach, whether it's your methodology or how you do it. It includes everything from phases, milestones. Like what I was understanding from the trailhead is be really specific in your statement of work because that will help you in the long run. It also outlines customer responsibilities. So are you doing all of the work? Are you partnering with your customer? Do they have in-house resources? All of that needs to be identified upfront as well. Number 5 of the 7 is your fee schedule, project schedule and fees. So timelines, what your fees are, whether it's fixed or whether it's like time and materials, things like that. Make sure you outline the terms and conditions very clearly. Again, it's a legal document, so you want to make sure that this is all encompassing. And then number 7 is the assumptions, because even though you're going to put in as much detail as you can on your statement of work, something will always pop up. So just including some terminology and some resources for those, what's the word I was looking up? The situations that you just really can't predict. They're just going to pop up because they do. So that's the statement of work kind of overview on that. And I did spend some time on that one because I feel like that's going to be asked a lot in the exam. It might not be, but that's kind of the feeling that I got. And then it talks about being ready to accept feedback and defending your statement of work, because you might get pushback on some of the scope or the timeline. And you want to know that you want your customer to have faith and have trust in you, that you know what you're doing. And therefore, it just establishes that relationship from the very beginning. It also helps you set boundaries. And then you also might want to have ways that you can reduce your cost already thought up and developed in case it really does come down to a budget issue. You have a way to lower cost for your customer to meet their budget needs. But the statement down here in the center is verbatim. Avoid reducing the estimated number of hours of work while keeping the scope the same. It can create problems down the road. And from just a little bit of personal experience, I think that's probably accurate. So that's what we have for there. And then it just talks about, as you're actually building and configuring, you just follow what you've been able to lay out in the parameters. Make sure that you are delivering on time. Make sure that if you're working with a team and it's not just yourself, you know who's responsible for what on your end. The same with your customer. If they're doing part of the building and configuring themselves, knowing who those point of contacts are, how you can get a hold of them, what their timelines are, things like that. And then just constant communication and that feedback. And if you run into a problem, making sure you have that open dialogue with all parties involved. So that's just kind of the configuring and building phase. The next one, we spent a lot of time talking about user acceptance testing and the importance of user stories. So I think probably all of us are fairly familiar with what a user story is. But basically, it just is the ability for us to outline what the user is going to be experiencing throughout the process in Salesforce. Whatever they're using Salesforce for, it's documenting each little step in that. So there's the parts of it, the who, the what, the when. And then it talks about how to construct a user story. So assembling your team, making sure you have enough people involved to get many different perspectives. So who are your users, what the goals are, what the constraints are, things like that. And it talks a little bit about accepting the need for criteria. So this is where you want to get really specific on the parts, the who, the what, the when. That's going to come through in the need for criteria. And then here's like an example of one that they had in the trailhead that I thought was pretty good. The customer care representative, and I want to be able to take ownership of new cases, communicate with customers so that I can provide high-touch customer experiences. So it's very specific in scope, and it tells you the who, the what, and the when. And then it talks about investing in the user story. And it references the invest checklist. It didn't give me a link or anything in the resource, but in the slides, I do have the link to this specific module. So if you want to do some research on the invest checklist, you're more than welcome to. But successful user stories, basically, they're independent of each other. They're negotiable. They're valuable, estimable. They're small, as in scope, so that you don't have too big of a situation that you're trying to plan for. And then you can test them. And then some mistakes to avoid is not engaging the right team, not identifying which user the story is for, why, if it's too vague, and then if it was assigned to the implementation team without a discussion. It's basically like saying, don't go have somebody do the work without having the discussion up front, which seems obvious, but I think we'd all be surprised at how often that really does happen. So there's user testing. And then chart your course. You're just going to deploy. And this will depend on the timeline, the resources, and a lot of the concepts that you laid out in your statement of work. So this one's fairly simple in the overall scope as far as what we have in the trailhead. But just know, when you're deploying, you've got resources to use for yourself, and you have the Show Me How resources from Salesforce. And then it talks about setting the milestones and kind of the order of deployment that you want to follow. So adding your users, but don't notify them yet. You don't want to get them in the system as you don't want to get the users themselves in the system, but you want their data in the system so that when you're configuring, you have the users in their roles and profiles, et cetera. You can import your data, assign it to the users, and so forth, and so on. But not until you're ready to train your users is when you want to actually notify them, have them set their password or log in with SSO and all of that kind of thing. So that was kind of the order of deployment. And then my favorite, actually, I kind of rabbit holed on this one this weekend when I was putting these slides together, is documenting. And so I spent a lot of time on the business process mapping part of it. So there's a lot of information on these slides. I'm not going to have you guys read them, and I'm not going to read them to you right now. But I would strongly encourage you to go back and do some research on this part, because what I'm finding is Salesforce puts a lot of emphasis on it because it's something that can fall through the cracks, but it really does benefit everybody if it's done up front. So basically, business process mapping is outlining what is the process, what objects are related to the process, who is involved, what the goals are, and you can kind of read through that. But basically, it covers purpose, creating, and then the benefits of it. Here's an example of one that they had on Trailhead. So it looks like it could get really complicated pretty quickly. And so what Salesforce also did in the Trailhead is give us some principles. And they used the term UPN, and it was Universal Process Notation. And it basically just says on your main screen, like on the main level, is no more than 8 to 10 boxes. And then let people drill down as you need to if you have a more complex business process. And then there are other process diagrams available. So they're listed down here. And they didn't recommend any specific tools to use, but it was really interesting when I Googled it to see what is all out there. It's pretty exciting. And then it talks about what you can look for in the tools that you want to use when you do your Google search and get all excited about the different resources that are out there. You can have all the different interfaces. You want to make sure that you consider versioning so that you have, only certain users can make changes to your process map, even if you want many people to be able to see it. You don't want anybody able to edit it. And if you're a beginner for process mapping, the intuitiveness is something to consider because some of them could be really complex. And then it just outlined the steps to mapping, especially if you're new to that process, as really just be specific. Each map is a process. And so you don't want 2 or 3 processes on the same map. You really want it to be one-to-one, and then just have many processes documented, or many mapping maps documented. So the process, and then again, it goes back to who's on the team so that you can make sure you cover all of the perspectives and the who, the what, the when, and your user stories, so you can gather all of that. Develop the process map, analyze it with yourself, analyze it with your Salesforce team, and then analyze it with the business users as well, so that you can make sure that you've covered any gaps, any issues, any constraints, things like that. Revamp it so that it's just a better version, and then just manage it and keep it maintained as time goes on. And then here's just some best practices, because I feel like Salesforce has best practices for just about everything. But it was the couple of them that I thought was really interesting is don't fix your processes until they're fully mapped. And at first, when I was thinking about that, I'm like, well, don't you have to fix it and then document it? So you're not documenting it not correctly. But if you're working then it kind of hit me. If you're working as a consultant, you really want to make sure that you outline what current stage is. And then you can find, by following the other steps of creating the process map, then you can continue to version it and document it until it's correct, until the business process actually works for your customer. So that was kind of a light bulb moment for me on that one. And then, of course, working with your stakeholders. And if we go back to our scenario where it's a company that's new to Salesforce. They might not understand a lot of the technical terms. So that just kind of goes back to that customer centric discovery strategies where just empathize with them, put yourself in their shoes, and just know that it might be a little bit of a learning process for them as well as far as documenting goes. And then really that was it. So I probably went really fast. So I apologize for that. But does anybody have any questions?
I felt like there was a lot of overlap with the business analyst certification. I was like, yay, this is familiar. I just took that one.
So it was funny to me too, because I'm like, business analyst is one of them that I want to take this year too. And I'm like, I should probably just kind of schedule them back to back because it did overlap.